Yeah, I acted a bit differently back then.
Hi, host Eric here, talking with famous people. I want to talk about autism, ADHD, and personality type. Let me give you a little bit of background in terms of qualifications, I guess. I was a special ed teacher for about 8 years with LA County. I had autistic students. I know how they behave. And I also had students who were called ADHD, but it was an ancillary thing. It wasn't their primary issue. Like somebody who has Fragile X syndrome will behave as very ADHD in the sense they have low attention spans, but they're not ADHD, they're Fragile X. Anyway, the point is, um, autism and Asperger's are phenomena that correlate very strongly with bad FE. So, if somebody is autistic, full blast autistic, like non-verbal autistic, what you'll see from them is a lot of self-stim. Self-stimulation going like this, putting their thing in front of their eyes, blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes people will mistake this self-stimming as indicative of autism rather than as correlative with autism, which is what it actually is. So they stim like that because they're not getting enough stimulation verbally and emotionally from the world. And especially for nonverbal autistics, they're not getting any data metaphysically. And so they are filling that void with the physical data of whatever, stemming, as they call it, making repetitive motions, repetitive gestures, stuff like that. Now, it's possible to note that NTPs do a fair amount of stimming as well. I do. I still do shit like this where I'll put, like, I'll close one eye and then the other makes it look different like kindergartners do. I still do
I
that
used to
sometimes.
like this until it bleeds sometimes.
And yeah, I mean, NTPs are stimmy in the sense that anybody who's addictive and compulsive is stimmy. But it doesn't mean that we're anywhere close to the autism spectrum. In fact, NTPs are the furthest thing away from the autism spectrum you can get because they are TIFE. Whether it's TI Dom or TI second, whether it's FE fourth or FE third, that metric is one that understands consistency and perception management as often difficult to reconcile partners in a business. And which one you prioritize is going to depend on whether you're nauseated by my claims or find them irrelevant to the substantiation of those claims. That's going to tell you which one you prefer. But either way, you're engaging the world metaphysically. The problem, autistic people fail to do so. They are unable to engage the world metaphysically in effective ways. They don't engage emotionally. They're not managing perceptions at all. And they, to the extent that but they do know their own feelings quite strongly. And what ends up happening then is you get people who are, in more severely autistic people, they are very insistent about getting shit their way, whatever it is, extremely insistent about it. And sometimes they'll engage in behaviors that are things that they do their whole lives. We had an autistic gentleman who sat next to us at the USC football games when my parents had season tickets. My parents referred to him as Special Eddie. Anyway, that was their terminology, not mine. So he sat there and he was autistic, and every game he did the same sort of thing. He talked to us about the other USC teams, like the softball teams that won 13-12, 13-12, you know. And he'd go down the list of all the fucking teams SC had and tell us, whoever's sitting next to him, me or my mom or dad, about the scores and what happened over the past like couple of weeks, but we didn't care. But the thing is, we did care about being nice to him, so we listened to him and engaged him in conversation and stuff. It was always the same because he's very clear about what he wants and completely unable to deal with perception management. if he were dealing with perception management, he would have understood that the fact that he wants to say the same thing every time is fine and dandy, but that other people are going to think he's not accommodating their interests or needs if he just says the same thing every time, you know? So now let's talk about NTPs and what they actually do typically have, which is a dopamine problem. They've got a dopamine management problem that is commonly called ADHD, and or a dopamine management problem that I would call INTPHD, which INTPs aren't exactly ADHD, but they have a lot of the same practical impacts of it because they got SE polar. So ADHD people don't really get a lot of shit done because they can't stay on task for more than 10 minutes. I know this from my personal experience. When I'm not taking any Adderall, I'm a 10-minute Tom. I switch from activity to activity to activity every 10 minutes. I'll read a book for 10 minutes, then I'll go sit on the computer for 10 minutes, then I'll go watch TV for 10 minutes, then I'll go smoke bowls for 10 minutes, then I'll go outside and pace around for 10 minutes, then I'll come back inside and watch TV for 10 minutes again. That's my life if I'm not on Adderall. And as a consequence, I'm going to be largely ineffective, except in bursts. Now, INTP, in contrast, is naturally ineffective because they have SE in the 7th slot. But they're ineffective at what? Following through on shit that's already decided and that is of no particular metaphysical interest. However, INTP can get around this because they've got 5th slot, ignoring but strong TE. And so they figure out the most effective INTPs figure out how to get shit done with the least amount of work. And that means that they're able to work around their SE polar by demanding extremely little of their SE and still achieving impacts. Now, both these types benefit from Adderall. ENTP benefits from more than INTP because ENTP is naturally improvisational. So the problem with improvisation is you can't keep it up for very long. You can, typically, like if let's say I was improvising a comedy routine where you're talking about improvising something that's difficult to do. You know, comedy requires, for me anyway, it's a responsive thing primarily. It's like somebody says something that sets up a joke. If I'm operating in a comedy world without allowing my extroverted intuition to work off of shit that's language based, then I'm having to draw inferences from shit around me. Whatever. It'd be difficult to improvise a long comedy routine that's successful at all. Extremely difficult. But what's not so difficult is to maybe write it out ahead of time and shit like that. So the thing is, for the INTP, the hard part is going to be getting themselves to sit down and complete this task they'd already decided on, writing themselves a comedy routine. For the INTP, the SE is the problem, the following through on that. And the Adderall is a way of you just start doing shit without reconciling it with your metaphysics. That's the important thing, because INTPs want everything to reconcile with their metaphysics. Well, that's like having a big fucking anchor around your feet. It's like, okay, well, and it keeps growing over time. It's like, oh, here's some new ideas. I got to integrate them into my identity, which means I have to pull along all of the identity I've had so far and check this against all these different things, and then go, good, now it's fine, part of identity. What Adderall does is it makes you go, forget that shit. What am I doing here? Oh, yeah. And then you just, yeah. And then you go, oh, God, that's not consistent. Let me adjust. Yeah.
Extra dopamine also allows someone to engage in an activity that is typically boring but has a future reward. And also helps with executive function. I've found that when I take Adderall, I am much more able to do mundane tasks which will benefit me in the future. And when being dopamine deficient as I am, I find it very difficult to follow through with. I've just gotten to the point where I can pay my bills on time, and I have the money in the bank. You know,
Yeah,
I'll
I'm familiar with that. I'm familiar with
you
getting
know
my
what I mean?
electricity turned off because I
Yeah.
just didn't pay the bill, not because I didn't have
No,
the
I just
money.
thought like putting the stamp on the envelope and going down to the fucking
Right.
mailbox.
Okay. So
Um,
so what happens a lot in regards to that? This is a TE issue too, is because when I go to pay that bill, what do? First, I think, okay, well, I'm not going to mail it in the mail because I don't know, I don't have the envelope or something. I've lost the bill, so I go online. I try to check my electricity bill account or something. Uh-oh, I have to log in. Whoops, I don't remember my password. Okay, well, fuck it then. I'll deal with it later. Because now it's too much of a hassle. And this is called not valuing TE. If I valued TE, I would have had those passwords. I mean, Google saves them for you. Gmail does. I mean, Chrome does. But um, I I would have had to have already logged into that at some point. Maybe I didn't get set up something or whatever. Anyway, I eventually got set up for electricity, a thing where you call it. I have to call them every month, but I just have to call them, and then you say yes, use the same checking account you already have, and take the money out. They won't let me do it for some reason automatically. Anyway, that's TE. Is my bad TE, my unvalued TE costs me so much time, so much efficiency, so much heartache, because if something's a hassle, I don't want to do it. If something seems like, another fucking barrier to easy success. This is such a mundane task. There's no juice in it for me. There's a little bit of satisfaction in getting shit handled, but there's no real juice. So if it proves itself unnecessarily difficult, and that's how I view it, I've already figured out the fact that I need to pay the electricity bill. I know which company to pay. I know I have the money. I'd like to pay it right now. You need to make it, this is my thing, you need to make it super fucking easy for me to do that. I should just be on Facebook and go, pay electricity bill, click.
feels to me like I've got a 50-pound bag of sand on my shoulders, doing things like paying bills.
Yeah.
And that 50 pounds is just too much for me to handle.
I'll tell you what's helped me a lot with that shit is being with Kimberly. I have a reason to care now. It's like, okay, well, I'll pay that bill because I have somebody to tell. I have somebody to pat me on the back and say, good job. I have somebody to report to. Hey, I paid that bill. Good job. Now there's a reason to pay it. But if it's just me approving or disapproving of my own behaviors, well, I don't give a fuck about paying that bill. I do give a fuck about having the electricity turned off, but when I prevent that from happening, who praises me for it? I need praise, god damn it. Otherwise, what the fuck is the motivation to do anything? So, the bottom line though, Asperger's and ADHD. One very popular insult these days for commenters, I've heard it multiple times, I've seen it in other places as well, is a commenter comes in and they take on this sort of medical expert tone, and they explain to you in patient, calm terms that you clearly are somewhere on the Asperger's autism spectrum, Eric, because of your FE failures or whatever else they say. Well,
You have issues with clothing.
I mean, people are it's a popular insult, right? It's a popular way to attack. It's an FE attack. It's saying, I reduce the content you're producing, I reduce the ideas you're providing to a manifestation of a disorder, that it's a symptom of what's wrong with you.
I don't see it as an insult. I see it more as a crutch for people to fall upon to explain their poor behavior.
I mean, it's not an insult. It's an attack strategy. I shouldn't. You're right. It's not an insult. It's an attack strategy, though, to say this is how I'm going to reduce this is how I'm going to be non-responsive. Basically, I'm going to be non-responsive to you, Eric. And the way I'm going to do it is a way that attempts to justify my non-responsiveness through the lens of the fact that what you're saying and your ideas or your content or whatever ought not be evaluated in the same way that a normal person's ought to be evaluated, because you've got a disorder that causes you to display these things that I'm trying to critique. Well, medicalization, or what you might call, what's that word? What's that called? I can't think of the word where you
over-diagnostic ting.
It's
People feel a need to place everyone in a category, even when they don't belong there. I was said to be that because of my sensory issues with clothing, special socks, special shirts, sensory overload in the grocery store, things of that nature, and my inability to read social cues. That was the base.
Unable to read social cues. You just don't prioritize them. That's the thing.
Well, that's probably true, and that's probably the misconception that the psychologist had when he evaluated me.
Right. Pathologize. That's the word I'm looking for. All right. So, yeah, people want to pathologize. If people want to pathologize your content, they're pathologizing you, and they're saying, I get to dismiss it without being responsive. So, I will just say to everybody out there, you can believe I'm as autistic as you want, or you can believe that I'm as ADHD as you want, or any other pathology you wish to ascribe to me. But unless you are responding to the actual claims I've made, unless you're responding to the actual warrants I've used to substantiate those claims, then you have a pathology. It's called being stupid. Thanks for watching Talking with Famous People. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.